Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're going to be reviewing Zaberias, the 2 to 4 player skirmish game. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's get reviewing Zaberias. Before we begin, I do want to give a full disclaimer. We were provided a copy of Zaberias from the publisher for review purposes. And let's start off with a quick overview of the game. In Zaberias, you're going to have 2 to 4 players fighting in a skirmish style, where you'll take the front of your boards here and put them together to make the play area. Once you're set up, it's going to look something like this. This is set up for a 2-player game. The boards are next to each other. You'll populate it with castles, then put all of your player pieces to the left. Then you'll be able to start summoning units, using your castles to summon units, and then moving them around the map to claim different areas, as well as fight other units and hopefully defeat them. Your ultimate goal here is to get rid of all of your opponent's pieces. Last person standing wins the game. Now, the armory is going to be your main feature, and that's actually on the back of these boards, and you're going to use the pieces on it to actually populate the board. You'll track your coins on the bottom down here, and then use those to build buildings, these castles, upgrade your castles into higher grades, and then use those castles of high grades to summon your large units. So not only do you want to make sure that you have these cities out to get giant units, but they're also going to generate income based on whatever grade that they are. So after you decide to summon those units, they all have their own unique effects, abilities, and that's listed on the back of these tiles, as well as their gold cost to actually summon them. They'll have a strength, which is a flat value, plus a number of dice that they can roll with a strength value from 0 to 3, a range if they are ranged fighters, and then their speed, which allows them to move onto the map. Whoever's able to pair their powers and abilities with their strategic and tactical planning is going to find themselves the winners of Zaberias. Now's a great time to start the review portion, starting off with the pros, the things I liked about this game. First off, the abilities of the characters. Every single faction is going to have 9 units to choose from, but these 5 on the top are generally going to have special abilities that are unique to that faction. For example, the humans have this giant dragon that's able to pick up and deliver other characters. You've got the zombies who have the effects where they're able to plague different boards, and then the green characters have this oak tree that can actually move the map tile and rotate it. I like how these abilities make sense. They work with the mechanics and the world and even the landscape of the terrain, and they're easy to understand. And these cool effects are also balanced by these smaller, simplified, weaker units. The ones on the bottom here, as they are uniform for all of the players, meaning that not every single player is going to have to memorize what all of these 9 different units do, having unique abilities, but you'll know, okay, that's the one on the bottom, it's that creature, I know that this guard doesn't really have an effect, or that's the mermaid so it can pass over boundaries. It's a great system that balances these complicated effects with these more simplistic basic ones. The next pro for this game is the simplified combat system paired with the support system. When you're attacking something in Zaberias, you're going to have a base strength here, and then you'll have a number of dice that you get to roll in addition to that. You'll add those numbers, and if you beat your opponent, who's also going to roll their dice plus whatever their defense is, then you are going to defeat that unit. But if you're too low, you actually get defeated in battle. Cool thing about ties as well is if you tie, the attacker actually gets to decide if they want to try again. You also have this cool combination system where it's called supporting, where if you're attacking one large target, you can use a bunch of smaller creatures to all attack if they're all in range. You'll add up all your values, your dice, and hopefully you're able to defeat that giant enemy unit. I like how there's still a chance for these individual small units to overtake this giant creature. It makes it so a battle doesn't seem completely lost if you still have units on the board if you've got this huge enemy that you have to tackle. And this also works inversely on the defense side, where you're able to support somebody as long as you're in range. I think that's very clever and it makes sense. It's simple and easy to run, and you're rolling on both players' turns, which is going to keep you engaged as you play. The next thing I like is the landscape effects. As mentioned before, the top of the boards are the maps that you'll place in between the players, and they all have these same landscapes on them. First, you've got the castles. This is where you can actually build your castles. You'll slot those pieces in, and that'll generate you income and give you places to spawn. You'll have these water areas that are going to just be nuisances and block you, but then you have 3 special areas. This bottom left one here where you can teleport between different boards, so everyone is sort of a little bit closer than they seem, but you could definitely just put a character there to sort of block it. Maybe that's where you spend one of your cheaper units. You also have these mines in the upper right here that are going to be able to generate income if you have a character there at the start of the turn. And then lastly, you have these bonus toughness spaces. As mentioned before, if your characters are attacking, they're going to use that toughness stat, and if they're on that specific landscape piece, then they're going to gain additional toughness. And the cool thing about this is if you are on both of those toughness spaces on both mats, then you can gain both of the bonuses. So there are going to be some high contention points to try to not only take out the opponents that are on them, but claim them for yourself. The last positive I want to talk about is the ease of play. A lot of skirmish games will have obstacles that are going to be there to stop you from actually getting them played, but when you want to play Zaberias, you just grab your board, you pull off that lid, and then you have your entire lineup ready to go, and you put that board in the middle, set up your first tower, and you're ready to play. I think that games like this get played in collections, and Zaberias is going to be one of those, where you can just say, hey, let's play a game of Zaberias, and then start playing, getting into those battles and using your special powers and abilities. Now let's go ahead and move on to the neutrals, starting off with the packaging of the game. Now I talked before how I love the concept that you've got your board here, you've got all your units, and you just put them out on the table and you're ready to play. But that does come with some negatives. As you can see, this board can just fall off if you're ever going to hold it in a vertical fashion. But if you keep it horizontal, that shouldn't happen. Now the same thing can be said with the pieces. If you are using them enough, they are going to become pretty loose in these spots here, and that's something you need to be aware of. So if you are going to get Zaberias and you are going to get multiple boards, you can just store them horizontally, that's fine, but I would recommend putting them in something like another box. That way you have storage, and so if things do fall out of them, they're not going to get lost. In addition, there are no rules that are included with Zaberias, so you're going to need to print those out as well, and there's no real good storage than to just sort of put them on top of the other boards and then just have them all stored in one place. So that's one thing. I think there's some great ideas here with the design. I love that everything's just right here, but we've seen this implemented in other games, things like Dwellings of Eldervale, where they have a console that has all your stuff, but it's a little bit more secure and everything is going to stay in its place when it's being moved around. So that's first off, that's the first neutral. Got some pros as well as cons in there, hence the neutral, the packaging. Next up is the weight of the game. Now the game is actually targeted towards children as well as adults, being pitched as an educational game, and that shines through in its mechanisms, where it is a very light game in all honesty. As mentioned before, you only have 5 big special abilities you have to worry about, and most things are symmetrical in the game system, the locations and most of the smaller units. So that's something you need to be aware of. This isn't going to have a huge amount of complexity and overhead, which means that the mechanisms are going to be restricted to that space. There's a lot of strategy within those small mechanisms that you can discover, but it's not going to be as apparent as other games in this genre. So that's something you need to be aware of, but I think it's fine for being this weight. I think it does its job very well. The next neutral is the time length of the game. On the back of your boards, the time says infinite, which to me is a little terrifying. I don't know if I'm going to get locked in this like 4-hour experience or if the game is going to be over after I set it up. So the how long is a battle section on the website also says that battles between tribes can last for centuries, and I find that a little terrifying. Now, I'm going to be upfront with you. I've only played this game at the 2-player count, and that's mainly to do with this time limit. I don't really feel like trying this game at a higher player count just because of the experience that it's offering. And that leads me to my other neutral with the 3 to 4 player game. As mentioned before, I don't really want to play this game as a 3 to 4 player game. I like it as the 2 player because a 3 to 4 player game has player elimination, as that goal is to eliminate all those enemies. You're going to combine all of these different towers and areas together, and your goal still is to eliminate every other person at the board. If you get your stuff defeated, you're out. Sucks. And as mentioned before, this thing has infinite time, so this is something that I did not even want to touch. And for the 3-player game, you do something similar, but you just slide one of the boards in the middle so it's still connected. This sounds cool on paper and maybe a fun thing to do to try every once in a while, but to me, I have no interest in this, which is why I put it as a neutral, because I can't do it as a positive or a negative, because to me, it just doesn't sound exciting to me. I wanted a cool skirmish game, 2-player experience, and this seems like a free-for-all style. It's my least preferred mode in these skirmish-style games. And the last neutral that I want to talk about is the graphic design, and that has to do with the way that the information is presented. As mentioned before, you're going to have all of your units, and generally, it's going to show all of the characters and the castles and the coins on the front here. But as you can see on this example, the actual cost of the units and their special abilities are on the back of the tiles. So at a glance, if you're looking at your different characters, you'd think that, okay, maybe these cost 1, these cost 2, these cost 3 coins potentially. That is not the case. Some of these large units are going to cost like 6 coins or 5 coins, and then these smaller ones are going to be anywhere between 3 to 4 coins. And so you're not sure, so you're going to have to constantly flip back and forth. I think that this is fine because there aren't very many units, so you can figure figure it out after playing it for a little bit of time, which is sort of what we've done. But this can be a pretty annoying when you're just starting to get into the game, when there's clearly some space on the front of these tiles where they could have just put the unit cost on the front there, or maybe a reference to what their abilities do with some symbology or iconography. Now, I get it why they're doing this, because they want to make sure that the language is simple, clear, and clean, and make it so it's not cluttered and you can see the artwork, but I do think that this would have been helpful, particularly if you're looking at your units at a glance and want to just quickly know, okay, what are my options? What can I actually summon? Instead of having to go back and forth and having to reference everything. Now that we've finished up with the neutrals, let's move on to the cons, starting off with similar early game, as well as almost scripted first turns. Now, all my plays, the winning and dominating strategy of this game has been build your castles early. As you can see in this example up here, this player has summoned their level 3 as well as a level 1 castle already, and that's going to generate them income. Now, that seems to be the correct move in this game. Now, I have not played it nearly as much as the designers. I actually reached out to the designers about this, and they said that there are a lot of other strategies that you can use to employ instead, but in my experience, if somebody has summoned a bunch of their small units, they no longer have the income to summon larger units, which means their board state is almost stuck. And because you're upgrading your castles and getting those 3 dice, you're able to summon giant units to defend and protect that castle when your opponent has actually only been summoning little things, and now they've spent all of their early economy on these small units, so they can't actually build new castles to start generating income. It's cheaper to just upgrade those castles, and it's more efficient, so it almost feels like this is the correct play to do, and why would you even set up with just a single castle in the corner? A game that I want to compare this to is Summoner Wars 2nd Edition. It gets around this entire problem by having these setup cards that tell you where your hero begins, as well as where your starting buildings and units go as well. I love this because you can quickly glance at what you're doing, and it gets you into the action right away, and I think that Zaberias would have definitely benefited from something like this. So that's my first con, the similar early game, as well as those scripted first turns. Continuing on with the cons, we have what I'm going to call the end game turning point. Now, as you play, you're going to get to a moment in the game where you're going to destroy a large enemy unit or a large castle, and immediately everybody at the table is going to know, oh, okay, this game is over, that person is clearly going to win now. This usually is a result of just becoming outpaced because they lost a key unit, or if you took out that 3-level castle, they no longer can generate any of the coins required to actually keep up with you. And now that means that just the player who's winning is just going to be chasing down these little units, but the game is basically over because with the few units they have remaining, there's really no way that they're going to be able to catch up, defeat your characters and your castles. It's almost like you should just stop and concede and just be done with it. And I wish that there was some way to include that or incorporate that in the game mechanisms, because right now it just isn't apparent in here, and it just leads to us conceding, which isn't a great feeling. So that's the end game turning point. My next negative is about the actual learning process of figuring out how to play Zaberias. When you get the Zaberias games, they actually don't come with any reference material or rulebooks at all, just the pieces to play. You've got to follow a QR code on the back here, and that'll lead you to the website, which will give you a link to a PDF here, as well as lots of different how to play videos. And then if you want a reference material, you'll need to print it out yourself and then store it with the rest of your components, probably in an additional box so that everything actually stays together. Now, Amitai Goldstein has done all of the how to play videos for the series, and you can tell that he's very passionate about what he's talking about. He knows a lot about the world of Zaberias, the different interactions, and he's created so many videos about how to play. But for me, they were not presented in a way that I found engaging, and I lost interest very quickly in trying to learn from these videos. I found it a bit frustrating actually because it was so drawn out and long, and it was not engaging. In addition, I thought that after just looking at the PDF, I could understand how the game worked so quickly. It made so much sense, and after learning the rules, I could teach it to somebody in less than 2 minutes. So I thought to myself, like, this was too drawn out a process, and it felt like there were all these barriers to actually just learning how to play the game, and I think that can be frustrating for people who are trying to learn this system. My last negative has to do with the marketing for this game. Now, on the front of every single board, there's a big number 1 in the corner that says number 1 best educational game for kids 6 and up to improve counting and reading skills. Now, what I want to know is who has given this number 1. When you go to the website, they tell you all the reasons that this game is good for learning. It builds social skills, it helps you with reading and clarifying different abilities, it leads to strategic thinking, and whenever you're doing combat, you're going to be able to figure out how to add things. It's going to help with your counting skills. All of these things, yes, I think are present in this game, but is it the best at this? I don't really think so. If you're going to use this criteria, I think that every single board game would be the #1 best board game for teaching educational skills to kids. Now, this game is also marketed for a young crowd. This is what's called the 3rd edition junior, and that makes me really confused on the actual target for this game. Is this for adults? Is this a tactical strategy game? Is this a game where you're trying to get a variety of people to play it, or is this going to be a 3rd edition junior? I don't think it presents itself as something like that, because as you saw with all the how to play videos, there are a bunch of Q&As on how these specific factions work, the interactions, the abilities, the almost homework you have to do to understand the effects. It's kind of wild that this game is being marketed like this when the game itself is at a higher level. To me, it feels like this game is trying to compensate for something, that they're using this marketing tactic instead of just the strength of the game design itself, which is a shame because I think Zaberias is a good game, so I don't think it needs to use this marketing strategy. In addition, when you go to Amazon to go check it out, it says Zaberias, a chaotic, cooperative, real-time card game. Do you see any cards in this? Do you see? This is not a cooperative game at all. Chaotic, maybe, but it's pretty deterministic. You have, like, the only thing that's changing is the dice, but you've got a pretty good ratio. You can understand what's going on here. I think that this is super misleading marketing on all fronts, and I think it's a really big miss because I do like this game, and I wish that the marketing would take itself seriously, not put itself as something it clearly isn't. So that's my last negative. That's the marketing here. With all of my pros, neutrals, and cons clearly laid out, let's move on to my final thoughts of Zaberias. For a 2-player skirmish experience, I rate Zaberias a 7 out of 10. I think this game is quite good. It's got an easy way to set it up and play. You've got the pros in the form of your special abilities, your simplified smaller abilities, you've got combat and support mechanisms that are interesting and engaging, as well as the landscape effects that make movement matter, which I love in skirmish games. You also have some packaging choices that I think are creative and awesome, but can lead to some problems, as well as the game time that's a little bit indeterminate and makes me not even want to touch the 3 to 4 player modes. There's also some interesting graphic design choices that are overcome just through more plays, and going back to the cons, the early game as well as the late game is pretty weak, and learning how to play the game is frustrating. And lastly, that marketing scheme is something that I just think doesn't do the game justice, and I think should have been reapproached. So those are my final thoughts on Zaberias. All in all, I think that you should check this game out, particularly if you are looking for a light skirmish experience. I think this is one of the best in this weight class, particularly for the fun factor tied in with the setup time and the decision space. So that is Zaberias. I'm curious to hear what you think about this review, about Zaberias, and my thoughts on it. What do you think about the game, and do you think that it would fit a spot in your collection? Thank you again to Zaberias for sending us review copies of the game, as well as for trusting us to give our honest opinions on the game as a whole. If you're looking for a copy of Zaberias, please take a look in the description of the video. I'll make sure to leave a link to it there. But thank you so much for watching. SideGame Strong.